Okay, I'd like to call the meeting to order for the APC date for June 10th,
Ninth.
9th. Roll call.
Board Member Bennett. Board Member Blatz.
Here.
Board Member Edmonds.
Here.
Board Member Huber.
Here.
Board Member Long.
Here.
Board Member Parks.
Here.
Board Member Pollock.
Present.
Board Member Ramirez.
She's
Here,
gonna be
can
on.
you see okay?
Oh, I'm sorry, I thought you were going to be off on
Board Member Rollins.
Here.
Chair Zaragoza.
here. Okay, Pledge of Allegiance. Can you help us out with it? Pledge of Allegiance.
Turn towards the flag. Put your hand where your heart and repeat after me. I pledge allegiance
To the flag of the United
Of
States
the United States of America
and to the republic
and
which stands one
Which
nation under God,
and
indivisible,
nation
with liberty
under
and
God.
justice for all.
indivisible,
Justice for all.
liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Our next
We
item
need
is,
to work on that.
okay.
Mr. Chair, Mr. Zaragoza?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, this is Steve Bennett. Yeah, so I'm here, and if I don't vote on an item, it's just because I had to jump off for a reason. Okay, thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Our next item is number 4. It's the minutes of May 12th. Has everybody read the minutes? And if so, any changes? If not, I'd like to add a motion.
I second it.
It was motioned by
Edmonds?
Carmen.
Carmen and Edmonds. Carmen has made the motion and Edmonds made second. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. Should we take a roll call?
So my machine is just spinning, so I'm just going to do the verbal. Board Member Bennett.
We can't hear the clerk calling the names.
No, it's very
Sorry.
faint.
Board Member Bennett.
Yes, yes,
Board Member Blatz.
Yes.
Board Member Edmonds.
Yes.
Board Member Huber.
yes,
Board Member Long.
Yes.
Board Member Parks.
Yes,
Board Member Pollock.
Yes.
Board Member Ramirez.
Yes.
Board Member Rollins.
Yes.
Chair Zaragoza.
Yes.
Let me see if I can get.
Thank you. That's been approved. And the next item is item number 5 is a review and consent of the approved by majority vote of the agenda.
Didn't, it's me.
Any minor revisions or changes to the agenda?
No. Move to approve.
If not, we need a motion.
Move to approve.
second, Huber,
Who's first?
Rich Rollins.
Roland, and second by Huber. Roll
Yes.
call.
Board Member Bennett.
yes,
Board Member Blatz.
Yes.
Board Member Edmonds.
Yes.
Board Member Huber.
yes,
Board Member Long.
Yes.
Board Member Parks.
yes,
Board Member Pollock.
Yes.
Board Member Ramirez.
Yes.
Board Member Rollins.
Yes.
Chair Zaragoza.
Yes. Okay, our next item is public comments. Do we have any public comments?
Seeing no public comments.
Okay, no public comments, so then we'll go over to item number 7, board comments. Any board comments?
Nope.
Well, I maybe like to share, I think that we heard from Sean Otten today that we're going to be open here starting the Monday, so potentially going to be able to now have the full board here on the dais with distancing. So we need to work on that, Lucky. So we're going to be opening here next Monday. just for information.
We also discussed the fact that the potential for board members still to Zoom in
That's right.
if they do not want to be here at the board meetings, and that people can Zoom their comments for public comments or email.
So we have the option
Here.
to Zoom in or also to sit here in the dais effective Monday. All
Are
righty.
we supposed to wear masks or no?
I can,
Are you supposed to wear your
This
mask?
is
or
Rich
no?
Rollins speaking.
well, if
Are
you
we
can,
supposed
if you
to
like to wear your
masks?
mask, yes, that's an option too. You can wear your mask, yes. Thank you for that. Any additional comments from the board? Members? Okay, if not, then we'll go to number 8, Mr. Lucky.
So to piggyback on what we were just describing with the reopening, the Air Pollution Control Districts also has developed its draft plan for the reopening. We are putting the finishing touches to the plan, and we are trying to coordinate with HR just to make sure that we are all on the same page. We are using the same framework. And soon after, we'll be able to set that plan into implementation. We're still going to be relying on, we're going to be executing the social distancing, and we're promoting teleworking to the extent we can, perhaps not at the same frequency that we have it right now. Maybe from 5 days, we'll go down to 4 days. Watch the numbers, and if things are progressing in the right direction, then further shrink down the frequency. So we are going to be very deliberate and very careful, but we are ready to move forward. The other thing that I want to bring to the board's attention, I shared with you last night an article that was published in the Sunday version of VC Star, and it dwells on the COVID and air quality impacts, just like we covered at our last board meeting, and also some of our work practices. So I thought it was a good article, and that's out there. And one piece of good information, I briefed you in the past about our very successful vessel speed reduction program. That's right, with Santa Barbara. And we were running out of funding on this program. We share our dilemma with our sister agency, the US EPA, and there's going to be some money coming our way to be able to continue that program for at least, for the next year or so. So we'll come before you as soon as we get that check.
That's an excellent program. And in fact, in the past couple of years back, we got awarded an award,
Right.
and working with Santa Barbara and Ventura County, and by reducing the speed of the ships out there by so many knots.
Right.
We saved a lot of whales.
Absolutely, absolutely. It's an excellent program overall for both the whales and us.
And also to add, because we're going to be opening, we can still follow the guidelines by wearing your mask, if you want to also. And also,
Yeah.
my understanding, we're still going to check the temperatures when the folks come in, which it'll help us all.
Absolutely. And we plan to do all those items are part of our draft plan that I was talking about.
Okay, thank you so much.
Absolutely.
Our next item is the public hearing regarding the adoption of the Ventura County Air Pollution Control District for fiscal year 2021 budget. And this is a public hearing, and I'm going to open the public hearing at this time. Do we have any people anybody would like to share anything on this public hearing?
No public comments.
Okay, if not, then we'll go ahead and go to our report.
Very good.
Okay.
Like I'll have to switch chairs. All right.
By the way, we're going to share that the standing committee also.
Absolutely. Yes. So I'll be doing the honors in presenting the staff proposal on our proposed budget for fiscal year 2020-21. And for the record, and those who are tied in through audio, I'm Lucky Tesopoulos, the Air Pollution Control Officer of the district. So as the Chair Zaragoza mentioned a little bit earlier, we have the pleasure of presenting this proposed budget to our standing committee, which, as you all know, is comprised of our chair, our vice chair, Mr. Blatz, as well as Supervisor Huber and board member Pollack. And we received the unanimous blessing of the standing committee. And this presentation is an abbreviated version of what we present to the committee. So this budget has been constructed under very conservative assumptions, and I'll be sharing with you some of those assumptions. Just give it a few seconds. Okay. Let me try it once again. No.
Okay, Brendan's going to save us, Sharon.
Oh,
Brendan?
weak battery, perhaps? Okay, all right, very good. Thank you. Yes, it does work. So this proposed budget includes both our operating budget as well as the pass-through grant budget. And in designing the budget, we had a few key objectives in mind. First and foremost, we want to cover our operational needs. Very importantly, I want to complete the building renovation project that we started this year, and we are at the tail end of it. Of course, we want to continue investing on avenues to improve operational efficiency by modernizing. And very importantly, we want to maintain our fund balance at the desired target levels that were recommended by the board in years past. And basically what the board had asked us to do was to maintain a sufficient balance to cover our operational costs for 4 to 6 months. And this budget does that.
And normally it's about, what, 3 months?
Right, in most other agencies. So just to summarize, when you look at the two budgets together, our proposed appropriations are approximately $15,600,000, and our estimated revenues are at $12.5 million. So that leaves us with a net cost of $3,090,000, and I'll have a few slides where I'll be diving into some of the details of what that $3 million is comprised of. In terms of staffing, we had 48 FTEs approved at the last year's budget. We went down by 1 this year to 47, and then we added back half FTE for the purpose of facilitating the recruitment. In the event we know that there are people who will be retiring or leaving for greener pastures, and they share that information with us, we would like to have the ability to initiate that recruitment process ahead of time, a few months ahead of time, bring the person in, overlapping with the incumbent, and help the transition process.
Basically, he's going to be shadowing then.
Shadowing the incumbent right before they retire or leave.
Transition purpose.
Yeah, exactly. So a few words about the pass-through grant budget. Even though this doesn't have any direct cost implications, it's a good piece of information. We have typically 2 full-time employees administering this program, and the typical grant programs include the car lawyers, the DMVs, the farmer programs, where we receive state funding or sometimes federal funding, and we help our local businesses in modernizing their fleets, their equipment, their tractors, and helping them graduate to newer, less polluting ones. They are terrific programs, and for this year, for instance, we'll have close to $10 million to allocate. So whatever money comes in, goes out, we have the ability under law to peg 6 to 12% of those funds to cover our administrative costs. As I said, we have 2 FTEs dedicated for that purpose. So with respect to the district's operational budget, as I mentioned earlier, we have a net cost of $3,090,000, and that includes $300,000 set aside for contingency. The building renovation dominates the lion's share of that cost. It's $1.9 million, and that's the remainder, basically, of our cost. We are more than 2/3 through that building renovation, maybe 75%, and by mid of next fiscal year, we'll be completely done with it. And that leaves us with an operating net cost of $878,000, which includes by far one-time expenditures, capital outlays that are necessary to modernize some of our equipment, vehicles, developing new tools, and of course the increase in salaries and benefits that were adopted by the Board of Supervisors and our board back in January and February timeframe. So from the 30,000-foot elevation, when you look at 2021 fiscal year appropriations, roughly 61% of our appropriations are to salaries and benefits, 21% are to fixed assets, and another 17% to services and supplies. How does this budget compare to last year's budget? It basically reflects it's lower by almost $3 million. And that's predominantly because most of the building costs have already been incurred. The salary and benefits have gone up by $257,000. The services and supplies by $60,000 by a marginal
Before we
amount.
continue on the
Yes.
$3 million decrease.
Right.
For the building, we also have some offsets from leases, right?
Correct.
We have some monies coming in from the leases.
Absolutely. And I'll be covering that a little bit later. You're one step ahead of me, maybe
Okay.
two.
I just wasn't sure, because if it's going to have a $3 million,
Yes.
decrease, we're also going to make up some monies for the leases.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely. So most of the reduction comes from the building renovation cost, but we also want, as part of this budget, to replace our antiquated monitoring equipment. We want to upgrade our servers. We have 6 servers. We want to consolidate down to 2 servers, and this is a good time for us to do it as we are moving to the new building. It has an upfront cost, capital cost, but we'll be saving money over the next 5 years. So it's a good investment to make. We have a vehicle fleet of 14 vehicles. They are 8 to 10 years old. They are in decent shape, but the fact that they are 8 to 10 years old, we are getting nervous. So I think it's a good idea for us to start slowly replacing some of those vehicles before the tires start, the wheels start coming apart. So when we look at our operating revenues, roughly 40% of them are coming from the DMV fees, another 31% from permit fees, and another 14.5% from federal grants. So these 3 line items all combined, they're responsible for 85% of our revenue streams, and the remainder of 15% is due to state subvention funds, fines that we issue, as well as some other minor revenue streams. How does this revenue picture compare to last year's revenue picture? It reflects a decrease of $5,300, so we are pretty much flat for all practical purposes. We are getting slightly more in federal 105 grant monies. We are getting slightly more on permit renewal fees and Rule 47 fees, but both of these increases are being more than offset by decreases on the new permit fees and also reduce AB 617 implementation funding and reduce interest earning. Interest rates went down, fund balance is lower, correspondingly our interest rate, interest earnings are also lower. So, and one additional thing that you should have at the back of your mind is just like past years, we have set aside $55,000 for VCTC, the Ventura County Transportation Commission, who has been helping us with the traffic modeling and rideshare programs. And we have been offering the same funding to them for the last 15 years pursuant to an MOU that was signed between us and them. And then we have another $25,000 set aside to support the electric vehicle infrastructure. This is by no means the only type of investment that we do in electric vehicle infrastructure. This is some money that comes from the DMV fees that we didn't spend, and it's a good way of investing this money.
Good.
So the big picture, basically, we continue to operate with reduced staffing. And something that we all have to keep at the back of our minds, looking towards the future that the permit fees that are bringing in, they are not quite covering the program costs. So we'll probably have to do something maybe for this year, maybe for future years, in terms of adjusting those fees for us to be able to cover our program
I
costs.
think you mentioned to the standing committee
Right.
that maybe potentially can phase that.
We can phase those in, absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
We have, for instance, an asbestos program that we have not touched for 20 years,
Mm-hmm.
and we are grossly under-recovering, through the fee structure that we have right now, our program cost. And it's always makes a good test for the government to recoup those costs. Not necessarily make money out of programs, but at least recoup our program cost and continue providing the service. Our revenues from DMV fees are quite stable. However, there are strings attached to them. We can only use them for programs that are related to mobile sources. So we got to find a nexus with mobile sources. We could not use a single penny out of those monies for pure stationary source programs. We have, as I mentioned a little bit earlier, very old equipment, monitoring equipment, vehicles that need to be replaced. And with respect to the pass-through grants, we intend to utilize every single penny administrative fund that is available to us to recoup our administrative costs associated with those programs. We want to continue our operational efficiency improvement efforts, and it takes some investment to do this. We want to do this not only to bring the agency to the 21st century and become, a modern organization, but also we want to use this as an opportunity to improve the service that we provide to our stakeholders. We want to complete the building renovation cost. The total cost is at $5.4 million. 3/4 of it has already been encumbered, and hopefully by the tail end of this year, we'll be able to finish that project and move in. It's a very good investment. It will help us save close to $390,000 that we are paying in rental fees right now, so we won't have to pay these monies any longer. Plus, we have our tenants in the new buildings that are also helping offset some of our operational costs. As I mentioned earlier, in constructing this budget, we use very conservative assumptions. For instance, we did not reflect for this year or even future years, for this presentation purposes and any CPI adjustments to our budget, okay? Also, when we go and inspect facilities and we ticket when we find them in non-compliance, we collect fines, we collect penalties, and there are approximately $80,000 to $100,000 that we collect on any given year. It fluctuates, it can be higher, it can be lower, but none of these revenues have been reflected in our budget. We didn't want to give the wrong impression to the public that we are trying to balance our budget with penalties, but
We wanted to comply.
exactly. But the fact of the matter is, we expect to see this money, and definitely this money is going to help us offset some of our costs. And the good news is that the district's fund balance is sufficient to cover the estimated net costs. Last year's budget had also had a cost. But when you look at the operational picture, we run a pretty tight shop this year, and we expect, even with COVID-19, to finish this fiscal year in a few weeks surplus. Don't hold me for this, but we are anticipating to be close to $500,000. Okay, so that obviously will be rolled over to next year and help pay some of those costs that we talked about. Speaking of the fund balance, there are a few line items that we have to include in the fund balance to comply with the federal accounting practices, GATSB practices. And I don't want to bore you to death with some of those descriptions, but I would like to draw your attention on the two line items, the assigned as well as the unassigned line items. In this particular budget, we have set aside for fixed asset acquisition $200,000. And for litigation, $300,000. We are not being litigated, and we hope we keep it that way.
Be safe.
But it's a good insurance for us to set some money aside just in case. And the same thing with the fixed assets. Then under the appropriated fund balance, we have the $3,090,000, which reflects the net cost of this budget. So when you subtract all these three line items from the starting balance of $8,600,000, you are left with $5 million, a little more than $5 million, $5,044,000, which are above the fund balance target zone that the board had recommended us to stay.
Excuse me a minute. I'm going to interrupt. There's somebody has not muted and their background stuff is
Somebody
bleeding
needs
in.
to be mute.
Yeah, I would strongly recommend you, those who are tied in by Zoom, to mute
Mute here.
your microphones, and then
When you get ready to share
echo
again.
will.
They can't be controlled, so.
I think that's, oh, hi.
Is it Ojai?
It's her.
Flats?
I think it's a back room, our closed session room.
Oh,
Oh, okay.
Okay. No, Blatz, no, you're muted and Pollock and Roland. Okay, okay. It's probably the back room there.
no one's in there.
Okay, we're okay now?
Are we good?
Okay,
Can you guys still hear an echo?
we're okay.
Well, you are on
We're
mute. That's okay. Okay, very good. So this graph, excuse me, basically graphically explains what we just talked about, but because it includes some of our projections, I think it provides some very useful information. So if you, let me see whether I can do this. So I'm going to walk you through, well, maybe not. All right, very good. So if you look at this red curve, basically it reflects our appropriations, our expenditures, if you will. And it goes through a hump here. And by the way, we are displaying here fiscal year 18-19 all the way through 23-24. So that hump that you see is basically reflective of the building cost. It's an artificial hump. And as we move to 21, 22, and beyond, the curve flattens out because we no longer have that impact, and that's how we like to see our budget. The second curve, the blue one with the blue squares, reflects our revenues. It almost looks flat, but in actuality, it goes down ever so slowly. These are revenues, but they're getting pretty close in the outer years. And the golden, yellow, or green, I can't tell what color this is, like yellow-green color, that is coming down reflects basically our fund balance. Pretty steep slope as we're going through the building expenses, the building upgrade, and then it flattens out. And as you extrapolate towards 22, 23, 24, it starts overlapping with the target zone that is displayed here below under the two black curves. The upper black curve is the 6-month balance, and the lower black curve reflects the 4-month balance that we need to cover our operational needs. So we are in fairly decent shape for the next several years. I'm a fiscally conservative guy, and I would have liked this curve to be even flatter and run parallel, if possible, to the upper boundary of the zone that we are trying to hit. And we can do this by sharpening our, let's see, if we can sharpen our pencil and reduce, be a little more diligent with our expenditures in the outer years, and if we can reflect some CPI adjustments to our fee revenues to recoup some of our program cost, we can make those two curves coincide, and then that will flatten out.
And that's going to save us money for the future.
Absolutely. And that point of intercept can be pushed out by several years. So to move on, to conclude, basically, we are financially in a very stable situation for the coming fiscal year, 2021. We do have a net cost of $3 million, predominantly dominated by the building cost, but we have a healthy fund balance that will be able to absorb that cost, and we are still, we remain above the target level. But it's extremely important that we continue being vigilant and scrutinizing our expenses moving forward and making the necessary fee adjustments in order for us to enable ourselves to maintain our fund balance at the target levels that the board has asked us to maintain. Now, all this budget was constructed in the January-February timeframe right before COVID-19. And then COVID-19 hit, and we started asking ourselves what type of impact COVID-19 may possibly have to our budget, to our finances, and is there any need to have a plan B or a plan C? And so we put some of our thoughts together, and basically what I can share with the board is, unlike some other local governments, such as cities or counties that may heavily rely on sales taxes, we are not a tax-based agency. So we are not going to be, we don't anticipate that we'll be impacted in a big way by the COVID-19. However, there could be some impacts. For instance, if some of the smaller businesses or even larger businesses shut down and they decide not to reopen, that it rely on our permits. We are not going to be receiving their permit renewal fees. Entities who are having cash flow problems may have difficulty paying their emission fees, their permit renewal fees. So we may see a deferral of revenues. For sure, we know that we are going to be seeing a delay or reduction in the pass-through federal estate grants that we receive. We know that for certain. We have already been forewarned. And while that reduction may not have a direct impact on our budget, because less money coming in means less money that we are going to be offering to our stakeholders. It's more the air quality impact that we are more concerned about. But we use a small fraction of those, 6 to 12%, as I covered in my previous slides, to cover our administrative cost. Obviously, we are going to be receiving a little bit less than that, so we'll have to subsidize the cost through some other means. So while we are not anticipating COVID-19, as we know it right now, to impact us in a big way, there may be some impact, and it makes sense for us to be prepared and have our action plan ready. So if that happens, what we plan to do is basically defer the non-essential expenditures, non-critical expenditures. Obviously, we want to pay our employees. That's number one priority. We want to pay for the building and move on to the new building. It makes financially good sense. But everything else, or most everything else, we can place them on the non-critical category and either defer those, phase those in, gradually, defer filling vacant positions, for instance, in the future. And as a worst-case scenario, if our backs are against the wall, we know that our fund balance is still healthy and we could tap into it, even though that's not a technique that we would like to utilize, and it would be an absolutely last resort to be utilized if absolutely necessary. Now, if those things happen and we need to change our budget, we'll be prepared to come back to the board with a mid-course correction and reflect some of those adjustments. But again, based on what we have seen thus far, we probably won't need to do most of these things. But then again, it's only June, and nobody knows what's going to happen in the next few years if we are going to have a second wave or, so it's good to be prepared, but based on what we have seen thus far, we think we are cautiously optimistic that we'll be able to weather the storm.
And the budget's a roadmap, and that's why the mid-year adjustments is so important.
Right.
So,
Correct.
Good.
Correct. And one final word, in putting this budget together, my entire management team has contributed to reflect their respective divisions' input, but the heavy lifting was done by Nancy Mendoza, my finance manager, and her right hand, Ms. McRae, who is also sitting at the audience.
Thank you, Lucky. I'm going to go to the standing committee, but I think it's an excellent budget. We discussed it in the standing committee, and I think that, as I mentioned before, one of the things too is that we have that lease revenues that's going to help us in the future too for that new facility, which I think is extremely important to have that. In fact, when we first started this project many years ago, one of the things that really was great about this project is the lease revenues, because we looked at the locations in Camarillo and Oxnard and so forth, but I think we're in the right direction here. So I'd like to ask, the standing committee members if they have any questions, and then we go to the board. And I think we have Pollock is on the board, and our Vice Chair Blatz and Huber. And do you have any questions from the standing committee point of view? Because the standing committee did recommend, is recommending to the board that we approve this budget, subject to, again, coming back on the 23rd. So, and board members?
Nothing from me.
No, this is David Pollock. I just wanted to thank Dr. Tizopoulos again for bringing back a very reasonable budget under the circumstances, and I really appreciate the efficiencies that we're going to have in the future, especially once we move into the new building. I generally don't like to spend down a reserve, but it's appropriate in this case. We have a plan. We want a range that we want to be into, and so it makes sense going forward. So I'm in support of this, and I hope the rest of the board is too.
Thank you, Dave. Okay, any other comments? Any other comments?
This is Ryan Blatz, and I'll just say I'll ditto what Dave said. And we the standing committee put in the time and effort to go through this. And if there's, as Mr. Pollock said, if you're not supposed to use your reserves now, when are you? Right? So it's unfortunate, but now's why you hold a rainy day fund, because this slammed on everybody really quickly. And the good news is that financial health of the air pollution control district is pretty solid, so we should be able to make it through it.
But Ryan, I think it's important that we're conservative enough to think, in the past for the future to have those reserves like we have with the county, which is really what makes it the agency so viable and so forth. And that's why you have reserves.
Absolutely.
We don't want to use them, but they're there. And,
Yes.
which I think is important. Thank you, Ryan. Edmonds, I think that you have. Go ahead.
Yeah, I just have a question.
Sure.
You mentioned that you were expecting some retirees. When people retire, do you bring the new people in on a lower salary? And if so, do you see how many people retire and would that affect and improve the budget?
So when people retire and we bring new ones in, no, typically they start at the bottom of the salary range, unless there are some extenuating circumstances. But typically there is a potential for some revenue savings when that happens. Now, when someone retires, they don't necessarily have to let us know ahead of time. So that's why it makes this one a little bit tricky. But there are some retirees that are very professional and they love the agency and they want to be as helpful as possible, and they'll tell us ahead of time. And when that happens, we want to be able to have that tool to utilize the tool and bring the new person in and overlap them for a few months and be able to transition. There is no guarantee that it will happen, but right now, even if we know ahead of time that someone is retiring, we just don't have the ability to start that process
but
several
sometimes-
months earlier.
Sometimes, Commissioner Edmonds, sometimes you have to start a position at a higher level, depends on
Correct.
the need of if it's a potential engineer or
Absolutely.
scientist or something.
These were the extenuating circumstances that I was referring to. Sometimes it makes sense in order to attract talent, to pay for the
Because
talent.
one of the things that we found out in this APCD, it's very competitive.
It's very competitive and it's very esoteric. It's very difficult to hire someone green right off the street and expect them to come in and fire on all 8 cylinders from day one.
And you have other agencies looking for those folks too. So
Yes.
I just want to share
Got
that
it.
part.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Any other questions from board members? So,
This is Steve Bennett.
Steve Bennett?
Yeah, I just would like to offer this. I mean, the current budget is fine, and I understand the logic and everything else. But I think we have to realize that we now live in a world with more uncertainty than we have in the past. And you could go through, some significant period of time where people aren't doing new projects, permit money isn't coming in. I just think we ought to raise the target level for our reserves. We talked about coming in sort of at a nice glide path to those, but I'm just think that it's in the best interest of the agency years down from now. People, may be very appreciative of the fact that we have a larger reserve than what our current target level is. So I would just leave it at that. I know the graph shows us staying slightly above that, but I would just try to raise the whole target.
And I think
Thank
the
you very
reserves,
much.
reserves are very, very important as we, it's helped us out tremendously. And for the Board of Supervisors, we're always looking for the 15% and we go down to 13, 14. But you're right, Lucky.
So I agree wholeheartedly. That's what I feel more comfortable with. And I think it's doable. As I mentioned in my few slides back, if we can sharpen our pencil with our expenditures, bring those down just a notch, nurture our revenues with some CPI adjustments, we could flatten out that curve and help out the reserve balance above and beyond of what we were projecting in the slide. So it can be done, so long as we are disciplined about it.
Okay, thank you. So what's the
My
pleasure?
point, this is Steve.
Go
My
ahead, Steve.
point is just that I would hope that in the future, we actually change what that target is that we're trying to flatten above.
Okay. Move the 6
So,
months.
I realize we can do some things, but as we, as we start to get there, you have people that use that as a reason why we shouldn't do a fee increase or et cetera. But if we
Okay.
change our target level for reserves, I think we have a better argument to be able to make for doing both the revenue enhancements and the expenditure reductions to secure the long-term health of this agency. The other thing I'd mention is, as the climate change battle picks up, and it will have to pick up, APCD is going to have a more prominent role, and APCD is going to need the resources to do that. And I think carbon is not being priced properly, and partially APCD fees are a small price to pay for carbon pollution, and keeping them higher is better than keeping them lower. Thank you very much.
It's a good point.
Absolutely.
So,
Quick comment in that regard too, because I was thinking that as we look at the budget, that APCD has such an important role they could play in addressing climate change because it represents all the cities in the county as well as the county, which oversees the unincorporated county. But I know one thing that we're looking at the board is a massive tree planting project, and to be able to have residents in cities and in the unincorporated area being able to participate and log in, the trees that they've planted, and just kind of being that resource countywide, it's a good project, I think, for actually next year if we can move towards it. I see how we've been able to use money from fines that were paid in order to fund the program to lower ship speeds and protect whales. That same kind of ability, I think, may exist for next year as we look at fines being used to help reduce the impacts of climate change. That's something that I'll be looking forward to next year if we can pull that off.
This is very, these are all very good points. And one thing that I want to share with the board is as part of improving our efforts to improve our efficiency, we are looking at our enforcement team and how can we make them smarter, more efficient in identifying leaky equipment when they go out and visit the oil and gas facilities, and not just those, but also other stationary sources, storage tanks and the likes, or service stations. There are modern optical techniques, cameras, infrared cameras that we can purchase that you are able remotely to see emissions that you cannot see with your naked eye. And in my previous life, I did experiment with some of those techniques, and they are powerful. We wanted to purchase them for our team here, but we just couldn't do it as part of this fiscal year. They are very expensive techniques. They are $100,000 a piece. But I promised them we are going to start the training. CARB has a camera. We are going to borrow it. We are going to experiment with it. And the moment we feel comfortable with it, we are going to bring back a proposal to the board, either halfway through this next fiscal year or within the next fiscal year, and bring those tools in. And those will help not only reduce greenhouse gas impacts, but also criteria pollutants. It's a win-win situation. It will force our stakeholders to be more diligent and
More
vigilant,
cognizant.
more cognizant, from there. And so, so there are ways that we can do to improve the situation.
Great. Good point. Good
And
point.
with the tree planting, by the way, Supervisor, we have our white paper and our advisory finalized, so I'll be working with your office to make sure that you receive a copy of it. And I see Mr. Rollins, do you have any questions?
Yeah, my one question is on the reserves. I heard the term target. Is the target 10%, 15%, 25%? And do you feel comfortable with that?
Very good question, Mr. Rollins. The target actually is what we need to cover our operational needs for 4 to 6 months.
Okay.
And you can convert that to
So
a percentage.
you can probably convert, so I would say it's for 1/3 to 4 to 6, 0.5%, 50%.
15, yeah.
Yeah, of our operational
About
needs.
15%.
So am I comfortable with it? I worked in the past with smaller percentages, to be frank with you. But what makes this agency a little bit special is the fact that we are much smaller. We don't have too many knobs to turn if hard times hit. So if the board's desire is to move a little bit higher, I'll be very comfortable with that concept, and we can gradually inch our ways towards that target.
That's a good point. Okay, board members, any other questions? The question I have, do we adopt this now and then come back, or?
No, we don't need to adopt it. We have to go through the second hearing on the 23rd, and the
So-
adoption will take place
So
there.
kind of, do we keep the public hearing open, or what is the direction? Where's county council then?
We're gonna
This
be
is
bringing
Jacqueline.
back.
We have
He's
it.
right here, Jack.
Can you-
Jacqueline's right here.
on
Can
the
you hear
20th.
me?
Yes.
Jacqueline, can you, do we keep it open or we come back on the 23rd for the second public hearing?
Yeah, the board doesn't need to take any action today other than holding the first
Okay,
of two public hearings. So I don't think you need to take formal action to close this hearing. I think it's enough to just hold it and then we'll be back.
on the
in,
23rd.
Yeah, about 2 weeks. And at that point, a resolution will be presented for the board to adopt.
Okay, well, then, thank you to all the board members and so we come back on the 23rd for the second public hearing on the budget. Okay, thank you. So item 10, it's a public hearing regarding the adoption of a resolution approving and adopting the 2020 Reasonable Available Control Technology State Implementation Plan.
Mr. Gassemi is going to be doing the honors.
Good afternoon, Chair Zaragoza, members of the board. Ali Gassemi, APCD Planning, Rules, and Engineering Division Manager. The item that I have before you is to approve that the Ventura County 2020 Reasonably Available Control Technology State Implementation Plan Revision, I refer to as a RACT SIP, meet the requirement of Federal Cleaner Act. At the same time, we would like your board approve the resolution and sign the resolution that to adopt that the RACT SIP actually revisions. To provide you with a little background, Ventura County has been designated as serious non-attainment area for federal 2015 federal 8-hour ozone standards, emission standards. As a consequence, staff is preliminary in the process of developing air quality management plan to demonstrate that we can achieve these emission standards by the statute deadline requirement of 2027. One of the elements of this air quality management plan is for your board to approve our RACT SIP revisions. We send the approval to CARB, and it is due to EPA on August 3rd of this year. The purpose of RACT SIP revision is to demonstrate that all of the district rules related to that they are precursor of ozone, these are ROCs and NOx, are compatible and meet the requirement of the federal Cleaner Act. And in order to do that, the staff has done analysis of all of the district rules, and we concluded that no revisions was required at the present time. We prepared the analysis and the report available for public comments, 30-day public comments from April 17 through May 18. We received informal comments from EPA and CARB, and we got one written comment from public, which staff responded back to them.
Okay,
I'm done with my presentation. I'm ready for any questions.
so they're all meeting the standards then?
Yes.
Oh, good. Okay, any questions, board members? No, none? So we need this is
Hearing none, I'll make a motion to,
this is a public hearing. Let me open the public hearing.
sorry.
Hold on a second. Do we have any public members that'd like to share?
No public comment.
If none, we'll close the public hearing. Go ahead, there was a motion?
I'll make a motion. That'll be long.
I'll second the motion, David Pollock.
Okay, motion by Kelly and second by Mr. Pollock. Roll call?
Board Member Bennett,
Yes.
Board Member Blatz,
Yes.
Board Member Edmonds,
Yes.
Board Member Huber,
Yes.
Board Member Long,
Yes.
Board Member Parks,
Yes.
Board Member Pollock,
Yes.
Board Member Rollins, Board Member Rollins,
Yes.
Chair Zaragoza.
Yes. Okay, and that's approved. Thank you so much. Our next item is the item 11, adoption of resolution approving the 2020 emission statement certification for Ventura County.
Chair Zaragoza, members of the board, the next item is to find that the 2020 emission statement certification meet their federal requirement, Cleaner Act requirement, and also we want the board approve and sign the resolution to approve the emission statement certification. The purpose of the certification is that the district has existing rule, Rule 24, which was last amended in 1992 by your board, and it was submitted to EPA in November of the same year of 1992, and requested to be included in the state implementation plan. EPA actually approved our rule, existing Rule 24, and included in the actually state implementation plan in December 7th of 2000. And at that time, they did not find any deficiency with our existing rule. The purpose of this rule is to state that our requirements of Rule 24 meet the requirement of Federal Cleaner Act, and we did our analysis as we did before a long time ago, and we put it for the public comments. Again, we did not receive any written comments from the public, but we got informal comments from EPA and no comment from CARB, and we are responding to that.
So we met the requirements.
Yes, it meets the requirements since then.
Great. Any questions, board members? If not, do we need a motion?
I'll motion to approve. This
Kelly?
is Long.
Kelly, one.
Second, Huber.
Second, Huber. Roll call.
Board Member Bennett,
Yes.
Board Member Blatz,
Yes.
Board Member Edmonds, Yes. Board Member Huber,
Yes.
Board Member Long,
Yes.
Board Member Parks,
Yes.
Board Member Pollock,
Yes.
Board Member Rollins,
Yes.
Chair Zaragoza.
Yes. And that's approved. Thank you so much. Our last item here is item 12, is receive and file the new source review annual report regarding Rule 26.11, emissions reduction credit evaluation at the time of use.
Board Zaragoza, Chair Zaragoza, members of the board. This item is just for your information. This is a rule that it was adopted in May of 2002 by this board. As part of the requirement of this rule, we have to create an annual report to demonstrate that our new source review rule regarding offsetting is equivalent to the EPA new source review rule. And based on our evaluation of 2019 annual report, our balance is still positive. We have about like almost 70 tons of ROC, and we have about 50 tons per year of nitrogen oxide as a reserve. This is just for your information, it's file and receive.
Okay, so this is just a receive and file then. Okay. Well, thank you, and thank you for, that would be our last item. So we meet again on the 23rd.
Thank you.
And thank you, board members, and I know the Board of Supervisors goes back to closed session.
Yes.
So we are adjourned.